Mainly, I wanted to focus on SHOT Show this year. You were there, I was there. It's obviously different than in years past. This is the first one since the pandemic started. Actually, the last one was 2020, but I think people forget this. Obviously, the pandemic didn't really hit in the United States until March of 2020. And so there were a couple months of 2020 where there were big things happened, including the big protest in Richmond, Virginia over the gun control proposals in this state at that time. And then SHOT Show 2020 happened just before everything. And then CPAC 2020, we were both at that as well. That happened right as things started. One of the first really big cases of it, the first like confirmed cases was at CPAC. So things are different now. And I'm just interested in your observations just to start off with from this year's show. What did you think of it? What did you think of attendance and so forth?
Yeah, I know there was a lot of misinformation about different companies pulling out. Some people were trying to dishonestly, I would say, preemptively describe like SHOT Show as a failure because of different COVID measures taken into account. But and I think you saw this too, I would say most of the major exhibitors and sponsors and bigwigs were in attendance. They had some presence. You saw Mossberg, you saw Smith & Wesson, you saw big entities, small entities. And in terms of crowd size, it wasn't as big as like years prior, but I think you had posted about it. It was like 40,000 people. It was pretty crowded enough for COVID standards, certainly. And it was spread across two different forums. You had the Venetian Expo, obviously renamed from the Sands Expo. So they put it back, I guess, to its original name since I was last there in 2019. And then the Caesars Forum, I actually really liked it because it was so spread out. It was huge and it was close to the hotel I was staying at. I was staying at the Link. And the outdoor pavilion was actually quite cool. I got to have a few meetings there. They had the SHOT Show sign if you wanted to pose with that. They had music playing, beer and refreshments. And it was good that they had expanded there. I think they put the new product showcase there. I went to the breakfast one of those mornings. And so it was a lot more expanded. So if they want to accommodate an even bigger crowd size, I would say once COVID subsides in the future, I think it's going to be a lot more comfortable for people so they don't feel like sardines and they could see more and get their steps in. So I did like the new expanded format, actually, because I didn't feel claustrophobic.
Yeah.
As much as I love the crowd size, it's great. But I think for safety measures, unintentionally, the new expanded format is actually pretty good if you're concerned about crowd size and you want some leg room and breathing room. I really liked that and I enjoyed that. And certainly the inconvenience of having to wear masks indoors unless you were eating or doing interviews. I think there could be worse policies. You could have a vax passport. So I was okay with doing that. I was able to, once you're like rushing and doing this, it is exhausting to wear the mask. So they're a little generous where if you feel exhausted, you could take off your mask for a little bit, breathe, get a drink of water, something. So it wasn't like you couldn't take off your mask for the said reason. So I know some people were brushing off attending because of that. I think among different friends and associates that I've talked to, a lot of people actually had COVID, so they couldn't attend and they wanted to attend. I got to see a few people that I wanted to see, but I didn't get to see everyone. Also because Safari Club International was having their big convention as SHOT Show was ending. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people, even if they wanted to come to SHOT Show, they just came to SHOT Show very briefly, and then they went to SCI at Mandalay Bay. So you had COVID kind of interrupting things. You had other conferences, people had other commitments. And even despite that, I would say it was still a success. So kudos to NSSF for hosting a trade show as safely as possible. Hopefully no COVID outbreak from the trade show. I don't think so, because they had so many things available for us. If you wanted hand sanitizer, you could get it. If you needed masks, they had depositories everywhere. So there was no excuse for people to be irresponsible at SHOT Show. So I think they were accommodating, but they weren't as, I would say, strict as people thought that they would be. They would give you leg room, like I said, so you could breathe and eat and take off the mask a little bit.
I think that's a pretty good overview of the situation. I mean, certainly there were major companies that dropped out, from Ruger and Beretta and SIG. There were a lot of big companies that didn't make it, but there were still a lot of big companies that did go. And frankly, the floor felt pretty full the whole time. Maybe that's just my new perspective in the pandemic world. It certainly felt crowded. Maybe not as much as it has been in the past, like you mentioned, but it wasn't like a ghost town or anything remotely like that. In fact, it seemed far more attended than CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, which was the same venue the week before. And so, certainly there was masking, and it was pretty universal. I think people, indoors in a crowd, I think most people would understand the risks of that in the middle of especially with the Omicron wave. And so people were pretty diligent about it. I think it's difficult anytime you're at a large event now to have your mask on 100% of the time. I mean, you're going to have some risk regardless, because you got to eat, or it's just life is not easy to meet that perfect standard of mask wearing or whatever mitigation effort that you're going to undertake. So there's always going to be some risk involved in going to something like this in the middle of, when we still have a lot of concern. But I think people handled it well. You haven't heard of any significant outbreaks, although obviously I think it would probably be hard to tell given the state of things at the moment, whether you got COVID at SHOT Show or just at the grocery store or something. It was pretty well attended, frankly. Like it just wasn't the ghost town that some people perhaps expected it to be. And it was interesting to see an event like this happen in this sort of a new normal, right? As everyone's said the last 2 years, and it wasn't impossible to do business, I'd imagine, there for most people because SHOT Show is mainly a trade show. It's where buyers go to meet up with sellers to try and get a product to pass along to their customers. And so it seemed like there was a lot of that going on. Perhaps maybe with some of the bigger companies not in attendance, some of the smaller companies had more opportunities to sell their products. So, it might be a boon for them, because obviously somebody like SIG or Ruger don't need that big presence at SHOT Show to sell their guns, and maybe they're not willing to take the risk to their employees of even just getting sick, let alone any worse outcomes. So it seemed like perhaps a good opportunity for those smaller companies.